All right, gang, good morning. Um, it's 8 o'clock for me and Perry this morning, so we're still drinking the coffee here for sure. But my name is Jason Theodore. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Banner Imaging. We're headquartered in Phoenix, Arizona, and we'll get into a little bit background about Banner.
And I'm Perry Kirwan. I'm the Vice President of Technology Management for Banner Health as well. So delighted to be here this morning, actually, with all of you. Hope you enjoy the session today. I think what we are attempting to do is sort of blend a couple of different perspectives, much like this conference is, right? So it's got a clinical administrative management kind of perspective, along with some things really from a technology asset perspective as well. And hopefully we can do a good job holding your attention, because I noticed what we have over here facing east. That's a pretty tall order there. So a couple of bikinis and all that. Wow, yeah, having trouble myself.
So we're going to talk a little bit about just 5 simple steps for action planning. As Perry just mentioned, we're part of a large health system that has pretty robust planning tools to make sure that we're making the right decisions. And then in comes a new company like mine, just 2 years in, that says, hey, I have some questions about those things. And we've wanted to talk about how we have used the time to really be deliberate about our decision making for the broader organization and the smaller ambulatory company.
Well, this is our obligatory, who the heck is Banner Health? So we are headquartered in Phoenix, Arizona, predominantly serving the southwest of the United States. Our mothership facilities really are in the Phoenix metro area. In the state of Arizona is really where we have the largest amount of beds, but then we kind of follow the mountain states up into Colorado, western Nebraska. We have facilities all throughout the state of Wyoming and northern Nevada, crossing the Sierras into California. And a little bit of our statistics in there, we're about a $9.5 billion company, give or take. So pretty good size in there. 32 facilities today. Pretty good bond rating, which we're actually really proud of with that AA-, especially during COVID. I'm sure most of you, if you're affiliated at all with a hospital or an outpatient imaging center, pretty tough to kind of maintain those financials in there. Really big on charity care, a little bit north of $800 million in there. So certainly we're obviously a not-for-profit based system. And a few of some other stats in there that I won't bore you with, right? You can kind of read the graphic in there. Also looking though from the back, this is a really long, skinny room. Is it readable from the back row back there? Yes, okay. A little bit about our organization in particular on the healthcare technology management side, clinical engineering, depends on what name you might go for out there. We offer a lot of comprehensive services in our particular division, both in the imaging and the non-imaging space. We have all the usual services in there in terms of corrective and scheduled maintenance, all of the regulatory functions and the like. But we also do extensive work in the project management side. We have a capital planning arm for Banner, along with the budget to go with it, to the tune of about $80–90 million that we use to do renewal-based capital in the imaging and non-imaging space. We're a little unique in format in that we actually have a medical physics group that reports up to us. So all of the usual QA, QC that you do on the regulatory side and all of that reports into our organization as well. Cybersecurity, medical device integration, and all of that. So fairly comprehensive. There really isn't much, I think, in the asset management arena really that we don't do. But as we encounter new things, I guess, to get our fingers in, like cyber would be something, I guess, relative to the time continuum that's kind of new. We would just naturally pick that up as part of just managing medical equipment assets in there. And that is our goal by nature, is just to be enabled technology-wise to do most of our own work, and we carry that out really throughout the enterprise. So this is kind of what it looks like real quick on the stat sheet. So under management, about $1.8 billion. We're currently at 230 employees. I'm actually 40 employees down. So if anybody's looking for a job and interested in relocating to Arizona, talk to me after this thing. I'd be love to hear from you. A little bit of stats there on the number of medical devices in the program, some annual work order stuff. You'll see this non-banner customer. So I think we're rather unique in the industry in that we actually run a commercial profit and loss company within our in-house group. And we sell that under the name Intech. And the goal of that particular organization, by bringing in a little revenue, continues to lower the cost of services that we provide for Banner Health. So that's how we're structured and sort of what the function of that arm is. And you can see a little bit about the operating revenue that we pull in, and then the locations and all of that we're involved in.
And then a little bit about my team. So we're the clinical team, and Perry's team provides support for my group. We're a 2-year-old. I think we're 2 years and a week at this point, but a 2-year-old ambulatory only imaging company. We operate as a physician practice. We're competing in the market on service and price. And through some of the conversations that I heard yesterday and some of the presentations I've heard yesterday, it was really interesting because our vision is we want to be a place where radiology professionals want to work. And we completely believe that if we have the right culture and the right service, everything else takes care of itself. And the group's doing really well. One of the things that we're really proud of is our net promoter scores are pushing 90. So really unheard of in our space. And we believe that service is going to help support the culture that we want to take care of our patients. We are 30 facilities that we completely own and or manage at this point. Not in all of Banner's locations, but we are in both Arizona and Colorado. All right, so we want to talk through a little bit about strategic thinking today. The entire message is to make sure that you take time to stop and think. I can't think of a time that something happened that if I didn't pause for just a minute to think it through, things worked well. So I like to make quick decisions. One of the things that I did for many years is I was a baseball umpire, and had the privilege of umpiring in the Big Ten and high school baseball and the Ohio Athletic Conference. And in that situation, you're supposed to make quick decisions. But do you ever notice umpires, for those of you that watch baseball, how slow they are to make a call? Someone runs to first base, and like 10 minutes later, he's out. You're like, that's great. The next batter's in the box. What are you talking about? Well, they're pausing. They're reading the situation to make sure that they saw it, and then they react. And that's one thing that I think as we go through this conversation is important. If we just pause for a minute to stop and think before we react, I don't know what the stats say, Perry, 9 out of 10 times, a lot of times, things will get much better for us.
You know, one of the interesting things about stop and think too, and Jason alluded to this just a minute ago, is that the outpatient business, you just kind of heard, 2 years old. It's like for Banner, although we have these services all throughout, they were never Banner owned until recently. It's really a new business line for us. And so one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this is we're actually on the acute care side of our business very good at stop and think. The problem is that our stop and think is so slow. I'm going to use your analogy about trying to get on base, that it wasn't working for Jason in the ambulatory side of the business, right? Nobody has time to go through the process that we go through really on the acute care side, right? And making decisions for 32 hospitals kind of requires that diligence, right? Doesn't work really well in the outpatient arena. So what we have to kind of do here is kind of blend a little bit of existing strategy in there, which is how to be fast and agile, but at the same time, not losing discipline and focus right? Pausing at appropriate places in there, right? So the right decisions can be made.
Yeah, we don't want to operate in a form over function environment, but we need a lot of the form to get to the function. We just don't want it to paralyze us. All right, so we're going to walk through the 5-step model. Just in thinking that is pretty basic, and we've really already given away the secret. But think about a problem that you're facing right now, whether it's capital equipment, whether it's a staff member, whether it's a tough employee, whether it's to purchase a different business, purchase a different product, and we can use that through the example.
Yeah, one of the things that I'd like to do here, if we could, is
I'm glad you're going here, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'd actually like to kind of get to know you, right? So the slide up here really is asking you to kind of think of a problem. We'll pause for a little bit and kind of let one sort of pop into your mind. Doesn't necessarily have to be work related either, right? I think sometimes that might constrain people a little bit. You get kind of paralyzed by the question a little bit. But I'd like to kind of know who you all are a little bit. Maybe you can just kind of comment a little bit really on a problem that you've had recently, whatever that might be. So for lack of a better place to start, I'll start in front of me. And your name is? And you're with who?
My group, I'm from Vancouver. We're providing the service for the
Nice. Thank you for being here this morning. And then you, sir.
I'm Nathan Smith. I go by Nate. Joint in south of Atlanta, in the Newton area, and also I'm on Diversified, we do MRI application support for a lot of the vendors here that install them.
Cool.
You want to know about any problems that I had?
Boy, if you sound like you have one.
Yeah, he's like, do I have to narrow it down to just one? Yeah.
In my world, working with data, trying to organize with engineers to get done, making them want to get started, have to roll in a certain day. So of course, we're managing people, right? And it's all remote, we're all over the West. We have some times where that doesn't work out, right? And I call it like ghosting, right? So I have been ghosted by like an application specialist, like that's supposed to be somewhere, or we check in, we try to do checks along the way that, like, hey, where you are, you okay? Did you pass away? Did you still scuba diving? What happened? And so those kind of things, I would say managing employee are really tough and difficult. I'm willing to work with a pretty nice guy. And I understand just treating people like me. So that's my thing.
How many locations, if I can ask, that you have to deal with in your role?
For the application side, all the states, and we're international as well.
Okay.
And then for director side, I have three locations with radiology.
Yeah. Okay. That's some real estate. Great. Thank you.
I'm Scott Long, I'm president of City Tech. We too are a for-profit arm of a large health system. And yeah, I've got all kinds of problems, but nothing that I feel comfortable in sharing.
Actually, good to see the people from CE Tech up there. I was hoping, since this is kind of in your backyard, that we'd see some folks. I'll have to chat with you a little bit after. I know some folks in your organization. Yeah, great. Thank you for being here.
So I'm the regional sales director for Climate Solutions for the Western U.S. and Canada. Top of my list, hoping to mentor and manage 17-year-old because of the pandemic, like socialization, working from home, which is like it's really struggling to have. Yeah, I had to stop and do a lot. So that is my biggest challenge right now, but it's
Now, I have a feeling that challenge is not all that unique, that everybody in the room has experienced that to some effect. Thanks, Chris. Yes, sir.
Tom Cruz worked with Sodexo out of Nebraska Medicine. Energy guy, engine repair. Plenty of challenges with Nebraska.
responsibility and keeping things up, coming projects. Right, a little more on the cybersecurity stuff that's going on.
Yeah. And that's a challenge really across all medical equipment assets. It's a very, very dynamic, and boy, sure, COVID put a number on that too. Yeah, I think a lot of people might have gotten a little bit of sleep at the wheel with cyber in there with all of the other things going on with COVID. What part of the state are you operate out of? Oh, so the eastern side. Yeah, we actually have a hospital over in Ogallala. We're over on the western side by the lake. Yeah, great. Thanks for being here this morning.
Jason's down at Equipment Health Services in Lebanon, Indiana. I think the most challenging is definitely dealing with the difficult employees.
Yeah, I think we've all, if you're in management, you probably run into that a time or two. Okay, I'll go from the back to the front.
Big problem right now is with looking at the facility. And so making sure got everything right. I think my biggest worry right now. Phones, light switches, which way the door opens. I mean, pretty big responsibility.
But isn't it nice to be talking about growing something? That's got to be exciting right now to be building something instead of some of the alternatives out there. Yeah. A lot of pressure. Yep, absolutely. Oh yeah. Well, you got a long list then, a laundry list of problems and all of that. I'm sure I co-opted your side of the room. Would you like it back?
No, keep going. You're rolling. I'm taking notes here.
All right. Yes, sir. That sounds like a cool role. Very needed too.
My name is Hayes Clifford. I'm with Newbed Inc. out of Denton, Texas. The South Central, Southwest region manager, cover basically Oklahoma, Texas, going from the south of Mason-Dixon line all the way to California. I would say one of my problem, I don't know if it's a problem, but fairly new to the position, so it's really a matter of identifying the appropriate opportunities to go after the appropriate roles that you need to deal with and that can actually make a decision maker, final decision maker, and having the appropriate level of communication with those people.
That almost feels sometimes that might be a little bit too much stop and think. If you're searching around trying to find the person that's going to make the call and the decision on something.
You run into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hey, everyone. Business development manager. My immediate concern is when I get back to Richmond, I have enough gas. But we manage a national service organization. But the big challenge for us is managing travel and consistency with trying to keep those travel costs low and customer expectations high.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I'm Max Vista, I too am a CCSAC out of Jacksonville, Director of Clinical Engineering at Plot Hospital for Health. Challenges, I think are common, or have commonality in everything that was already mentioned, nothing specific that I would consider different.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being here. Yeah.
Good morning, I'm Nicole Denridge. I am the Assistant Director for Northern Arizona Healthcare. So I have 3 hospitals, a couple outpatient facilities that I oversee, radiology specific. And my problem list is a laundry list as well, but on the operational cost efficiency, especially we're somewhat remote. So to get staff to provide the services without wondering if we're going to go dark or people are going to leave as a result. So quite a few on the operational side. And then just we have numerous projects going on, acquiring new equipment, expansion. So just being able to juggle all of that effectively.
Yeah, it's a lot to handle. Yes, sir.
My name is Garrett Gregory. I go by Greg. I'm a biomedical engineer with Baptist Health and a small business owner. I guess my biggest issue today is why I'm here is kind of transition into radiology. My departments have a lot of radiology equipment, so looking to transition and kind of learn more about the field.
Well, you've come to a really good conference from that because you have peers here and you have customers like the ones you would actually serve in there. So it's a really good, diverse perspective and all of that. So, well, thank you for all introducing yourselves. It's kind of helpful, kind of know who we're talking to here. And we've got really a diverse audience, which is great. So I'm really hoping as we go through here, we'll be able to sort of extract just as much from you guys as hopefully we're attempting to impart.
Yeah, and I think that's a great exercise, having a small room and just as you mentioned, so that you can meet folks and get some names. That's really one of the important parts of a conference like this. So one of our problems that I'll touch on, when Banner Imaging began as an organization, we were in a market that had a lot of 3D mammography. And we did not. We just had a couple units. I don't remember the size of our total fleet. It's somewhere in the ballpark of about 30 mammography units at the time. This was around 25, give or take a couple either way. And we went through a process very quickly to find the right partner for Banner Imaging to move in this space. And I think it's probably fair to say we had a good collective plan and broke many of the standing rules within Banner, right? We figured out exactly what we needed and why and went in that direction rather than what's typically been done in this space, mostly because this was new at this type of a level. So we're going to use this just as we go through. And Perry, I don't know what you think with some of the examples, but sounded like team building, employee engagement, tough employees, staffing was all in the example we can use as we go through it as
Absolutely.
well.
Yeah.
Reflective thinking. So this is the importance of stopping to think. This is the pause, read, and react that is important in any process, making sure that you have the right people involved, that you're thinking about it the right way, that you know that you have a plan of attack. For me, this is the part where, like a playbook or a recipe, you actually will take step by step, begin the step-by-step process.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And to kind of tie it into what we were saying earlier, so this would be sort of in the acute care space, really kind of defining requirements and what it is that you're trying to solve. Which again, on the acute care side as an organization, we did pretty well. We have everything really from academic medical centers to rural healthcare to a blend of everything in between. A lot of hospitals, a lot of consensus that you got to kind of bring together. Very slow. And so one of the things that we had to kind of work out when the mammography example was pretty good is how to take some of the things actually organizationally that we did very well, but figure out how to accelerate them. And also in our case, I will just speak kind of to the clinical engineering side. It's understanding really the business differences between your inpatient and acute care environment and what the ambulatory environment, all of that requires of you. So this was kind of an opportunity for us to kind of mix disciplines a little bit, is to kind of take some of the things that we did well, but actually make it work in the outpatient arena. And to do that, we actually had to challenge, and you saw that on the slide in there, what some of the prevailing status quo was, right? If you were to come to me and go, what is the standard for mammography and Banner? I could tell you what that was, but that was based on a specific set of criteria and requirements at the time where we were making those decisions. So we came to Jason in there and said, we can act fast. We've got a standard. Let's go do that, as if the standard was actually going to work for the business. So did we pause and think really in that scenario? No, we didn't. We presumed that we knew what the answer and all of that was. We're going to kind of come back to what happens with presumption and assumption and all of that, and that this was just going to be perfect for Jason's business without really having to analyze and understand really what the issues were that we were trying to solve for in the ambulatory space.
And as we were going through that, we had the opposite effect. So I knew that I wanted 3D mammography. I knew that I wanted it yesterday. What other questions could there really be, right? It's just a mammo system. They're all straightforward. So those two really became competing priorities, and we had to reflectively stop for a second and make sure we were thinking through most everything. So some simple tips to stop and think in some basic questions. And I find a couple of these a little bit more helpful than others. So just walking through, the first one is what's really going on here or with me. And using the 3D mammography example in our situation, I had physicians telling me we needed it. I had customers telling me we needed it. I had staff. So I was already biased, right? I just need it. I didn't even put a business plan yet together, and I'm thinking in my head because of what I'm going through. I need it. If I ended there, that probably would have been bad. So we needed to go through and think, what are we trying to actually accomplish? And we were trying to accomplish easier healthcare and being a place where people want to work, and having the right technology for our customers and for our staff and for our physicians made a lot of sense. And if we do that well, the bottom line comes with it. And what type of situation is it? Is it the, I think it's Covey's grid, that's the important versus urgent. Is this really important, or is it just simply urgent because I'm making it urgent because I'm hearing from people that I should make it urgent? And what else do we need to know? And I think when we get to that question, that's where Perry's team and my team really cross collaborated in a way that came to a good conclusion.
You know, I had to put like a big set of carrots under all of that to sort of summarize what we're doing in here. The trick here is to keep focus on the 4 questions in here. It is amazing, especially when you've got a lot of outside pressure going on, right? And everybody's, I got to have this and I got to have that. And they're coming at you from many different directions like that, is to stay disciplined with the question asking that you have in there, because it's really easy to drift, right? You start to get distracted by some of that noise out there, and it's very easy to kind of miss some of the steps in there. So we've listed out the steps and all of that specifically, right? But the challenge I think that you'll have is not remembering what the steps are, right? You look at this, I mean, how many people are going to go, well, gee, that doesn't, that sounds kind of like common sense, right? These would be the things really that we would normally do. But will you actually do it when confronted in the situation? And that, of course, depends on the situation. Some decisions are such, the timeline is kind of baked in so that, okay, that'll work, right? Nobody's after you for that kind of answer tomorrow type of thing. But when you have to speed up and all of that, the thing is can you hold the discipline to go through the steps in there? And our thesis would be is if you do, you're going to ensure, even with speed, that you get a good decision at the end of it all.
I think that's great. And one of the things, hearing the staffing comment a few times as we go through this, that what am I trying to accomplish is usually the biggest one for me. So when someone's ghosting me, or I can't find someone, or they're not coming to work, or they're not making the right decisions, whatever those things are, what am I trying to accomplish? Our HR leader's actually done a really nice exercise with our team. These conversations, as upfront as we all think we are, those conversations are never easy. And a lot of times we make them quick and we're not necessarily clear and we don't really outline those expectations. So one of the things our HR leader would do with my team is he would sit down and say, what do you want to tell them? What you want to tell them versus the scripting BS that you're going to tell them, a little bit different. So what do you want to tell them? No, what do you really want? We're sitting at a bar right now. What do you want to tell them? Okay, now we need to clean it up. And then go through it a couple times with someone so that it just becomes natural and easy. Next thing you know, you can sit down and have the quick conversation of, Harry, you're done ghosting me. I'm paying you to be at this place at this time, and I expect you to show up. It's what we owe our clients. If you do that again, whatever the ramifications are, if you can get to that quick cadence, it can go much, much better. And it is really taking that time to understand what you want to accomplish in that discussion. Because every discussion we have should actually be accomplishing something. And I think that often helps as we're building teams.
Yep, and if we translate that into the clinical engineering perspective, what do you want to accomplish really is kind of setting criteria and requirement. I'm just going to kind of put it out there because I think that's how most engineers think, right? Frame a problem for me. What is the requirement in there? And then I can solve your problem, right? So that's how kind of the clinical speak and the technical speak kind of, it's a little bit different, but they get us kind of to the same point.
One of the other deliberate thought processes, and I should do this much more than I actually do, is to go through this type of grid and this type of framework to think things through. So you really start with political, and you'll notice this breaks down from organization into the world and into the industry. Because I don't know about you all, but any organization I've ever been in has actually been highly political. Just navigating through your own organization sometimes can be difficult. So that's really question or answer number one on here is what politics exist in the organization. As we go.
Then just a question off of that, Jay. So does political to you just include the organization itself, or does it have a broader connotation even than that?
No, I think it's broader. So if we go, that's a great question. As we go into the industry right now, there's a lot of people trying to make payment reductions. So that can be political. And then in the world or in the country, not to have a true political discussion, but depending on who's leading what in your state or in your government, how we actually proceed and make decisions may change based on the government's involvement or payment plans that we have. Mm-hmm. So that really can hit multiple things. Yep. Really same going down the line as we think about the economic impact, the social impact. It's crazy for me right now how much of social impact I have to think through, just because of where our world is thinking and how we interact and how we communicate. And now we're working from home on a regular basis, so making sure that you understand those comments as well. I think from the technology side, we all get that side of it pretty straightforward. And then there's some more specific government, and using the memo example, is the government paying for 3D or not? It takes some legislative process to work that through. And then just what's happening in the environment. So COVID gave us a good example of that. It slowed down the supply chain, and you couldn't get certain things, and still can't get certain things. You can't get gas on the way home. So thinking through those things can help. Yes.
What time frame do you use? Because some things may take 5 years, and then you're stuck. Well, do I wait? Do I move forward? And then other things like technology, it expands so rapidly. So how do you determine? I struggle with this because it's like, do I look 3 years out, 5 years out? And now I feel like I have to look the next couple months out as you plan projects.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a terrible answer, and it depends. But typically I'll do a short term and a long term. Like, what does this really mean for me? Short term being this year. and long-term being 3 to 5 years out. I find, and I would love your perspective, Perry, that if I start thinking about and planning anything 3 years out, that's just too far. So much is going to change by the time that we get there. And 5 years is typically my cutoff because that's really far out there.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would add to that is, when you're thinking in a longer term, and in healthcare, it really doesn't make a lot of sense probably to plan beyond 5 years, because literally things change too much. But even when you're doing that, you're doing it at a very macro level. I think what you're analyzing in there is very, very relative, as opposed to some of the shorter term planning that you do. And then I'm just curious, I'll ask a question for those that actually are managing kind of a common problem like that was described, is how much your fiscal policy in the organization that you're in alters the way that you even think through how you plan. Because I will say that, just being transparent with Banner, that's one of the things that we're certainly wading through right now, is to, really understanding what this ambulatory business is about, how it has to be stood up and respond to community need out there, and then applying fiscal policy to it in an appropriate way. And I don't think I'd be knocking anybody down with a feather here to say, wow, there's still a discovery and a learning and process in there, because it influences you, right? I bet you there's a number of people in here would go, okay, I have my opportunity to buy something. How many of you actually had the tendency to overbuy a little bit because you're trying to plan ahead for something, and you only get a number of times to drink at the well, right? It's my turn to buy something, so I got to make my purchase and all of that count. So what am I going to be doing 5, 6 years from now? I'm curious. Anybody, is that a behavioral dynamic that's happened out there? I'm looking for a head nod or something out there.
I saw a couple.
Yeah. It's and I think most of us really are challenged with that, right? And the logical thing to do would be is, okay, let's not make all of those decisions at one time, right? I might want to plan certain upgrades or certain feature sets to imaging modalities, maybe 2, 3 years out in there. But if my capital supply isn't reliable enough for me to manage that way, what a conundrum that is, right? And I think that's sort of my interpretation really of the question that was asked, right? So it is challenging. That's kind of why we all get a little bit of a depends answer, and we're all trying to kind of figure out how to really optimize doing that. And I think our brains kind of know how to do it, but it's really organizationally kind of matching behind it in there so that we can hopefully learn to deliver better on that as we go.
Yeah, and it gets to that total cost of care and total cost of ownership, right? Mm-hmm. So I'll use MRIs as an example. We just purchased MRIs. We had a capital budget for a project. It was a great capital budget. There was some money left over at the end, and all of a sudden people are like, well, but there's money there. Well, we should get this coil. Well, we should get this software. And we're like, well, for what? And making this up. Well, because we really need the cardiac package. Great, there's no cardiologist. Do we really need a cardiac? But there could be. So that's where you got to balance that short and long term. And we try and take it into that total cost of ownership so that we're making the right decision for the period of time. All right, identifying assumptions. These are some of my favorite ones. So this is really important when we go back to the staffing and the engagement and the people type of discussion. So I think of when we're identifying assumptions at times, if I say to one of my friends, I want to meet for dinner, what time are we meeting? Well, we're meeting for dinner. Well, we didn't clarify that. Is that 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, right? So if a few of us just say, hey, let's go meet for dinner tonight, we can all show up at different times. And it's really getting to the accurate level so people can understand specifically yourself as you're walking through the process. Any thoughts on assumptions, Perry?
Well, so just a couple of examples just with technology assumptions in there, right? We talked a little bit, actually Jason just went through it a moment ago with the MR, right? We assume we're going to grow the cardiac business, right? We had none of the foundational information, there wasn't anything in that analysis in there that said, wow, we've got a business plan to get us from A to B, right? But we're going to assume all of these things in there, right? In that kind of the build it and they will come kind of model in there. And then what are we really doing for ourselves really in the end? Well, good work, might not work. I'll be, again, in the interest of transparency with Banner, I've seen more of those kind of decisions not work than actually have worked in there, right? Because we didn't really make them on solid footing, a lot of assumptions. And assumptions can even be broken down just in terms of technology choices as well. So I'll give a couple of examples of that sort of for our imaging engineers, and these may be some things that you've run into over time. You remember when we first started to put fluoroscopy on CT scanners? Had a bunch of people running around out there for a while saying, wow, that's going to be the death of RNF rooms, right? We're out there kind of promoting capital planning like that. We're going to recapture all of these rooms and all of that. Just because we did one thing in the CT environment, right? We were ready to change the whole business model, okay? And that's just from the technology perspective. I can't even imagine what that would have looked like from an operational based perspective. So fast forward to today, right? Did that decision pan out? Not really. Right? And just think what we would have done in the path we could have been on, right, if we would have just kind of followed some assumptions at the time. Run into a similar case in cardiology when they started to put rotational spin on C-arms, right? Now all of a sudden, going back to my CT, now we're going to eliminate CT, right, because I can do all of these rotations and all of that in place. Was that really practical? There's some good ideas, and I don't mean to denigrate rotational angiography and all of that, but to think that that's going to take the place of CT imaging in there, that's a pretty big leap. But we sure had a bunch of people on committees in the past. Moving forward, really, that was the grand assumption. And it was going to change all of these other dynamics in there. So it's very important to kind of understand really what your fundamental information is. And to Jason's earlier point, don't assume when somebody answers you that the answer is always clear, right? Going to dinner. Well, what does go to dinner mean?
This is one of many examples of assumptions. So some of you may not even know that this happened because it happened so quick. But a few years ago, the Gap changed their logo. And I believe, don't fact check me on this because I could be off just a little bit, but within the same week, they changed it back. And you hear that a lot from different organizations as they're trying to change things because they think they need it changed. The Gap wanted to change their logo just, I think, for the sake of changing. And someone probably came up with a really good idea like CT Fluoro, right? Well, if we change it, the business is going to grow. Well, what happened was their customers about lost their mind because that assumption was just made that the customers would enjoy that. So I can think of other examples other than the Gap, but it is pretty interesting in business how big of an impact that can have across the country.
Well, brand awareness, right? Everybody comes to kind of know you by certain. I've only seen actually one company actually pull off something with their branding in there and actually make it work, and that's Google, right? Because we can get on every morning and Google looks different every morning on the splash page, doesn't it? That's the only time I've actually seen that actually work, right? Coke is another example. We were talking about that one this morning, right? Some genius out there thought, well, I can make Coke better than it was, right? Remember that? Oh my goodness, how well did that turn out, right? So, yep, I think industry just in general is fraught with, well, we can see what assumptions do, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a couple comments on general assumptions. Popular opinion is still opinion. I've worked in some health systems that have given answers to things saying, this orthopedist won't go here because of X, or this neurosurgeon won't move to this hospital because of Y. We can't get business because of Z. And then when you actually get in there and fact check those things and verify those things, you learn that none of that was really true. So that information can really start growing the snowball and really make impacts to people's thinking. And no one really just stopped and verified for just a second. Just stop and verify. All right, evaluating information. I know that Perry's team does a really good job of all the information. You remember the list of things that he's responsible for, all the information that's coming in and how we evaluate that now that we have that. This is where we can get into trouble because I can already be thinking a certain way going in and have those biases. And that can become a problem and really just direct something in the completely wrong direction. So some of the evaluate information questions, much like the questions we shared a little bit earlier, pretty basic. Is what we're reviewing even relevant? Is it accurate? Did we actually verify that it's real? Am I being persuaded? This is one of my favorites because I don't know about you all, but I can really make data tell any story that I want it to tell. So are we being persuaded as we get into the facts? And have I personally, looking at it, been objective? And as we go through evaluation, those are some helpful questions.
Yeah, and then to kind of put some of the questions really into some practical terms. There are common resources really that I think everybody has access to. And the question is do we take the time really to use them? Maybe in some cases, do we even know that they exist? So I'm going to kind of just list a few out there because these are go-tos, I think, when you're trying to make decisions on well, in capital in particular. Resources like MD Byline and ECRI, right? And those organizations, as they grow in sophistication, are doing more and more, it seems like every year. There's a lot more types of information that we can extract from them. In the beginning, it was kind of like product comparison guides, right? And you're just kind of stacking vendors up in there and you're able to kind of compare specs in there. Still very valid and very helpful, right? Because we need to kind of understand what the competition, what the even products are in certain places as we're making a decision, and how they generally speaking compare to each other. So good information to have. Both of those organizations now have evolved to have technology assessment arms to one degree or another. And these are helpful because what it does is it takes now, instead of just equipment and focusing on equipment specific things, it's putting a business context to it. We can learn a little bit what's going on kind of from a market perspective. And again, by design, they're not designed to answer every question that we have, right? Because these are sort of generalized trending tools, if you will, right? Individual markets will set up dynamics that you have in whatever your market is. But what it does do is it provides a really good template in my mind of like, oh, well, let me answer the question for these set of conditions in my particular service area, whether that's a city, whether that's a region, whether it's nationally speaking, depending on what type of organization really that you're running, right? SG2, things like that for market forecasting and all of that, really a great tool to use to kind of understand what the market in general looks like. These are sort of economic impact kind of statements in there, and what's happening, what is the latest happenings, if you will, kind of in the regulatory space, and what's going out there in terms of legislation and the like. So very good tools to work with in that regard as well.
Are those subscriptions? I know of ECRI, but the others subscription.
Yeah. Most everything out there really is a subscription base, and with these type of services, generally speaking, I'm not a fan of subscriptions. That's kind of overused, and the software industry has kind of taken that over. Now everybody wants a SaaS model or something similar for about everything that they produce. So like anything else, we got to make good decisions about when we subscribe to stuff and when we don't. But I think these are very much worthwhile in using. And you can use those to kind of supplement your own organizational dynamics. The one thing I want to be kind of clear at is that none of these subscription services are the easy button, okay? They're not going to do all of the work for you. You can't use them as a substitute. And unfortunately, administrators sometimes that we report up to kind of look at it that way, right? It's like, well, go buy that, and then we just read this, and this is going to kind of magically spit out the result really that we're looking for on the other side, okay? It's not a substitute for really going through your own process and what your own unique dynamics and all of that are, right? They're supplemental tools, right? Because you have to define what your own criteria and requirements are first, and then kind of build that information around it really as a layer. The other thing that I get asked a lot too is, where is the physician themselves in something like this, right? Because physicians will come to the table with their version. I like the one previous slide that we had on there, popular opinion is still opinion, right? And so you'll hear a version of literature, right, from them. And so we must do this because of these and because of these, right? Well, it may be missing certain pieces of context and all of that. Now, we still want that feedback, but we want to make sure really that what we're getting in that regard is accurate and is verifiable. One of the things that we do on the acute side, and it's actually intentional, I mentioned earlier that we have academic medical centers, is we use our academic medical center environment to help advise on what's in the literature and what's not in the literature. And that helps us. We have people that are very passionate about that and are not afraid to call people out that are misconstruing a statistic or maybe giving you half of something that what the literature says without the other. Very valuable. And that's one of the ways that we've been able to connect physician input into the process, because it's important. You can't remove them from the process, but it's kind of figuring out how to use them in a way that's going to be the most effective so that it doesn't turn into an avenue, right, of further confirmation bias. How does that actually work in the outpatient center? Because I did it on the acute side. It's a little bit different in your business.
Yeah, we're a little bit different. I have a formal physician advisory committee that is to give advice, as you can tell by the name, right? But give advice on growth opportunities, on strategy, on technology, on quality, on equipment, on relationships. It works great. And I have a great group of physicians that are really engaged in partnering through all those things. But it's also really important that I go through questions like this, because to your point of having someone from the academic side saying yay or nay, I already know going into a discussion which ones of my physicians hate change. So no matter what we're talking about, it's a bad idea. And those that like change, that nothing's fast enough, why aren't we growing, why aren't we changing? So you have to make sure that I'm not being persuaded in those discussions. But the physician advisory formality is very helpful. In other organizations that I've been in, I've even went as far as having a decision document put together that actually goes through the pros and cons of various decisions, and then everyone signs off. While 6 months later that might not be accurate, we took the time to actually write down our assumptions. Here's what we know right now, and this is why we're making this decision. And it's helpful if you have to pull back to it when you have that moment of, why the heck did we make that decision? Because so many things could have changed.
Absolutely. And the other thing that it does, so it is really important to document all of this really as you go, because not only you may, and that happens a lot, right? You want to go back and go, some future point in time, how did I make the decision that I did, right? So if it's written down a little bit, at least you understand what the prevailing logic was at the time based on the information that you had. I think the other thing that's important as well is that if you're ever looking to do any kind of process improvement, which is, okay, I think I did a good job on this last decision and all of that, but now I got to make another one tomorrow, right? And so being able to kind of understand so you can kind of follow up on your own work. You know, what worked well, what didn't, which assumptions and all of that I made panned out, which one didn't, right? That so that you can always constantly be tweaking and moving forward.
I want to go back to the subscriptions question. The Healthcare Advisory Board, Optum, whatever the heck they're called today, they have a imaging performance partnership, I believe, that is a subscription service. But through that, I think some of the information that advisory offers is for free. So you can get on there and get some information. One of the other things that I've done is I will ask our vendor partners for that information, because they all subscribe to all of these things to understand what's going on in the world. And while there's some rules and regulations of what they can share and not share, if I ask a couple of them to pull, say, a market assessment of one of my sub-markets in a town, what's the population, what's the CPT codes that are being charged, what DRGs, what's admissions. I can at least create a blended model because they're going to pull them from their different subscriptions and share bits and pieces which they're allowed to share. So for me, that's been one way to not pay for so many subscriptions.
You said that was
Optum is now the advisory board. Optum.
Yeah, while we're covering.
I think they're,
Oh,
sorry, Perry,
yeah.
I think they're advisory.com as their website, I think.
And while we're talking about free, another tip and trick on that too. So if you're not comfortable using suppliers in that role, the other thing that you can use is a group purchasing organization if you happen to be a member of one, because they do exactly the same thing. It's interesting to get market impact information really from a GPO, right? And if you're a member, right, that's just one of the things that's offered as the membership. So anyway, just kind of another avenue that you, again, you wouldn't have to pay out of your, accounting unit or cost center for that.
Well, nothing's free. It's good to have cheap, I guess, other ways
Cheap.
to find things. Yeah, so induction and deduction, just as we walk through how to draw conclusions, we just spent a long time saying, get the facts, verify the facts, trust but verify, make sure you get the facts, don't make assumptions. And that doesn't always work either. I'm not saying umpires do this, but just in case, right? Sometimes, that ball comes in relatively quick. Sometimes you might blink. So you're going to make an assumption based on what you have just seen. You got a bad umpire joke or anything?
Sometimes you trust on the frame.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have a good relationship with that catcher and you trust on where they framed it and you just didn't see anything, you're going to make a quick assumption. And sometimes that's better than no decision at all. 50-50, I guess. I don't know how often necessary. What's that? Well, that's right. If half, maybe this is a business, this is true in business too. If half the people are happy, you're doing okay. If only half the fans are hollering at you, you did something okay for someone there, I think.
I think one of the things that we can say also, right, very true in the medical imaging realm, just to kind of give you another example of inductive reasoning, right? Because you would think, gee, we've spent now all this time together talking about facts and things that we can verify, right? That's very quantitative, right? We're looking for data, things that we can compare and measure. How do we deal with subjects like image quality? Now I can data that to some degree, right? I could maybe compare the type of detector technology that we have. We could look at things like DQE and all of that, right? We can put some numbers and measurement to it to compare, right? Is that going to always give us the answer that we're looking for? Is that always going to be? Can you imagine having a conversation with a radiologist and that's all you got when he's talking to you about image quality, right? So I think the point in that is that it's going to be a mix of two things. And as much as you think, gee, we don't like inductive reasoning and things that we might have to infer, you actually have to make kind of those calls in there. You run into the image quality question before, Jason?
Yeah, recently using the Mammo example.
Yeah.
So you hear it both ways, right? The image quality is spectacular. So your next question, well, why? Tell me more. The image quality is terrible. Why? Tell me more. And it's sometimes hard for people to get there. When we first went along our mammography path, that's what our radiologist initially said, well, the image quality is terrible. Like, well, I don't know what that means, right? We had a bunch of people trying to understand and get to the details of, is it? And if so, why? And what is it? And it took quite some time to get through until you could actually get some of the details. I'm sure we've all heard image quality for one excuse or another over the course of time. Deductive reasoning, also just kind of going through the basics here as well. Just even if you have all the right information, it's not always all the right information to lead you along the way. Any good examples from your team, Perry, on some deduction more that you want to share?
Well, I would say, like I said, the deductive reasoning, especially if you're a service engineer and all of that's one that's going to feel really good, right? Kind of a sweet spot in there because, again, it's things that we can bring concrete data to once we verified it and all of that to make decisions and all of that. So for me, that feels the comfort zone is totally there. So I think what's always interesting is when we have to kind of blend some of the inductive effect really into that more than anything in there. Every time I kind of see this slide, I go back to image quality because it's the perfect example in my mind of where you have to use a little bit of inductive thought and deductive thought all in the same conversation.
All in the same,
Yep.
same example for sure. And then action planning, what happens next? It's interesting for me, specifically around equipment. I think we're pretty good at business action planning. What was your turnover for the month? Most people can know that. What was your customer service results? Most people will know that. Develop an action plan or a countermeasure. But I have found with equipment, we don't always go back to understand if we made the right decisions, we made the wrong decisions. Did we even make a decision, and how do we do that? So just some of the tips on action planning. What's actually going to happen when you make the decision? One of my favorite lines are, what are the unintended consequences? Every decision is going to have consequences, and understanding some things that might bump up that you've not known about. Important. What plans need to be made to implement it? So I heard the facility examples and some of these other examples. What do you actually have to do to pull that off? And what type of resources are really needed? And how much time to implement a decision? I know I've worked with people before that decisions are made. We use building a hospital. Well, yeah, we made the decision, we're done, right? Well, no, we actually have to build it and then get it operational and then take care of a patient. So understanding all the resources to get you to the end game is vitally important.
Do you find people are willing to pause and say this is the wrong decision, or you find projects go through and then sometimes that is a factor?
That's a great question. I think it depends on the team. I know from my direct team, we have no trouble questioning or calling out, making sure we pause for a minute to make the right decision. We were actually doing that yesterday with a project, to pause and make sure that we're doing the right things for the right reasons. So we are building a new sports medicine center, a few tens of millions of dollars, and we have some new orthopedists coming into the center. What we initially thought we would need from a technology standpoint and a software standpoint and so on, versus what the orthopedists think we need, have been drastically different. So we had to pause because we've been told by the system, you need to go do this. And we're like, we're not sure we need to do all of that. We may have to do these couple things that we didn't think of, but we might not need to do all of that. So it's going to be a good lesson, I think, for our organization overall to make sure that we can pause and think through that. But to me, it depends on the comfort of the team willing to speak up.
And the thing that I would add to that, so this is an opportunity if you happen to be a leader of a team. So one of the things that really makes Jason's team very effective is that he is disarming to the committee. It actually is okay to object. It's encouraged actually in there because they're deadly serious about that stop and think thing. Because we all know what happens if that thing starts to go down the wrong track, right? You're not going to catch it after a while, right? So if you happen to be a leader, right, of such groups in there, that would be something that I would say, well, there's an example in that, because that matters, right? I don't think, maybe it's instinctive for certain people, depends on your personality, right? Some people just aren't afraid to speak. They hear something, they think it's off, and so they just naturally speak. I might submit that the majority of people really don't, because it's very easy when you're working in groups and committees to kind of get sucked into groupthink. And you may in your mind think, gee, this doesn't feel right and all of that, But what are you doing? You're looking around all the other people in the room. Well, they're not reacting like anything is wrong. So now you question yourself. And so what we really want to do is understand, especially if you have a multidisciplinary team. Why do you build multidisciplinary teams, right? Because we're looking for all of those different perspectives. And everybody in the group has to feel comfortable raising their hand at any point in time saying, what about that? Or is this thing that was just said really, really right? And I really see that as a leader attribute in there, right? And I think that's why the answer that Jason gave is just my theory in here. I didn't rehearse it ahead of time, but hopefully it's okay. Is that's why you get a depends answer, right? Because it depends kind of on the team makeup. And if you have people in there that are very effective, right, in making sure that all team members are heard and that it's comfortable for them to object in there, more often than not, you're going to get a good result. That's been my experience anyway.
Yeah, that's good. Our team's done a lot of, not to get us off this track, but we've done a lot of team development because we're only 2 years old. And probably two of the most, maybe I'll say three of the most helpful is as we pulled together as a group, we went through Strength Finders. I don't know if anyone's went through the Strength Finders assessment. At the time, it was purely for me to understand what people's strengths were. But also for them to understand what their strengths were. That helped us get the right people in the right positions, right seat on the bus as we were acquiring different businesses. The other one that we've done is real colors. Basic thing, right? Gives 4 colors. I'm the business guy, so I'm a pretty gold. Just do it like this. And then the blue folks are the ones that are outgoing and building the culture. And I know to go to my blues when I want to do something nice, because I don't know what to do if it's going to be nice. I'm on the gold side. But understanding that and feeling comfortable with that in our environment to walk through and really know where people are sitting. And then lastly, The Speed of Trust. It's a great book. If you've not been through The Speed of Trust, really talks about the importance of having that trusting environment and how that'll actually improve your organization's financials because things are moving faster and people understand. So we were really deliberate understanding what are people good at? What do they actually like to do? I like to align those strengths. And then probably the last thing with all of that, knowing people's strengths. Some people have a lot of fun with this. Other people absolutely hate it. We will typically, and not always, assign a devil's advocate during the meeting, right, to get the other side. So someone could completely agree with what we're talking about, but we want someone to question absolutely everything just to make sure that we're stopping to think. We have some people that have a lot of fun with that, for sure.
Yeah, not to get off on a real colors commercial and all of that, but one of the things that I like about that is that's a way that you can, because it's fast. I mean, you can get into some more complicated models that do the same thing, right? Trying to understand what the personality types are of individuals and all of that. So you mentioned you were gold. Did you have a secondary color?
Orange.
Orange.
Which they kind of conflict with each other, right? Gold's the super organized and orange is the strategic random guy.
Yeah.
So I can conflict with myself a little bit, but because I think that way, I will try and lead conversations with, I'm thinking conceptually right now. So people know I'm not going to tell you dinner's at 5. I'm just going to be thinking about eventually eating dinner someday at some point in my life, right? It's the conceptual thinking. What were yours?
Yeah, so
I didn't realize you guys did that.
Oh yeah,
too.
we did it as well. And so I'm green orange, and that's another thing of polar opposites. So the green color type is all left brain, right? So most engineers, you take the thing, you're going to go, oh, I'm green. There's a big shock and all of that. But then I got this orange, and the orange in me is really sort of your innovation mind and the rule breaker, which anybody that knows me, I break all kinds of rules. I'm always doing that, trying to figure out how to do something different because I don't like status quo. Right. And, you know, you have to be willing to kind of fail a few times along the way when you have kind of that personality type, but it's interesting. So the orange doesn't necessarily pair with the green. The green is supposed to be kind of conservative, not a real big risk taker, but somehow I found this blend of wanting to go out and sort of push the envelope on certain things, But going back kind of to our talk, when it really comes again to deductive reasoning and how you make decisions and all of that, you'll find very quickly, very rooted, obviously, in fact-based type stuff. So anyway, it's an interesting thing to do. Again, it's kind of fun because it's quick.
It is quick, and that's funny that you guys have done that, and that explains a lot for me, knowing your colors and knowing why you like all these questions and then can break rules, right? It's not just the rules, it's that orange. Orange is a fun spot to live in. Does anyone have good action planning tips? Does anyone have a really good process that they've implemented that the group could learn from?
I think one thing for me is recognizing the experience of the group who's participated in the decision making. So for example, I came into one project, they were looking at installing a new MRI and they didn't even extend hours, look at adding resources. It was like the orthodox, they want more, they want another scanner. And everybody was, I would say, persuaded by that, and nobody was really willing to stand up and go, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense yet. We're going to invest 1.5 million, but we haven't tried this. So it was, when I dug into it, the more I recognized, well, the people who were on the decision-making team to drive this, were either put there on purpose, or, you know, they really just didn't have the experience to say, what else can we do before we invest this money? So that was a big eye-opener for me.
Yeah, that's usually, did you do everything along the way
Right, exactly.
to get there? That's a great example. Any other ones? So touching on action planning tips for just a minute, one thing that my group will do or two things. So if we're looking at the business that we have, regardless of the business, if it's financial results, if it's new customers, if it's whatever we determine, we have what we call our deep dive process. And that's when myself and a couple of our senior leaders will sit down with really a facility manager or lead and say, hey, what's going on? And we go through just a real easy document that the team walks through. And we'll deep dive a little bit with them, because to the point of the MRI and the expanding hours, once you're having that conversation to know where other people really are, you just asked all the questions that we've went through, and you can really get to the answer of how you can help that business move forward. And that deep dive process works pretty well for us. We also have two different look back models. So one, if you come through the deep dive, 2 months later, we want to know that you did what you said you would do. I think that's where a lot of times with action planning, we miss that. Did we ever follow up to say, we said we were going to have dinner at 8 o'clock. Did we actually have dinner at 8? Or was it at 7:30? Or what time was that? And did we accomplish what we wanted to accomplish? And we'll do that with our large projects. We're beginning to go back and do a 2-year look back to say, did we accomplish what we wanted? Kind of that decision document. Review of why did we make certain decisions? What assumptions did we have at that point in time? And then what assumptions and what do we know now? Because if we put together the 3 or 5 year financial performance and it's just adjusted because some things happened that no one knew would happen, how do you adjust in flight and understand that?
Yeah, you know, and the thing that I would add kind of to this model that we've presented today is that this is scalable. So we've spent a lot of time today, you know, talking about things that are kind of big decision oriented things, right? Capital or building a hospital and all of that. But you know what? You can actually apply this even to service management delivery, right? If you're the person doing the repair on a modality and all of that, you're instinctively, I hope, going through a lot of this stuff, gathering facts, right? Symptoms, what am I seeing? What am I measuring? What are the type of things that I've got to make other kind of reasoning decisions on, like image quality? What additional questions is that going to trigger that I need to ask to try to get closer to what the problem is? And then once you think you've diagnosed it and figure it out, I sure as heck hope if somebody would have an action plan, right? You have a pretty good idea what your approach is going to be, what you're going to accomplish and all of that. And then to pick up on Jason's point in there, and we've talked about this throughout in there, you always have to have a feedback loop. right? To understand, okay, I got a result, was it the right result? And measure where you are, right? In the case of a repair, it's going to probably be a successful repair or not, or maybe sometimes you can get somewhere in the middle of that, wash, rinse, repeat, right? And you go around in there until you get that thing nailed down. The point in all of that is the principles are solid, and if your problem is kind of this, it works. If your problem is that, it works. And if it's somewhere kind of in the middle of those things, it still should work, right? Time frames will be a little bit different because that's all in proportion to the problem and all of that you're solving. But the principle basically, generally speaking, holds. I'm assuming it holds in clinical operations as well, right?
I would assume, yeah. I think that's safe. I think as we begin to wrap up here, one of my favorite books was a book that Urban Meyer wrote when he was with Ohio State. I'm not an Ohio State fan, but thought it was a good book. I have some friends that are trying to make me Ohio State fans, but I'm not an Ohio State fan. It was a really good book. And during my time when I was in Columbus, I lucked out and was able to use the same consulting group whose name I've just forgot that he did with the Buckeyes. And what they taught was E plus R equals O. So your event, any event that you have, your meeting, your conversation, your time that you walked in the room with someone, plus your response equals your outcome. And that's why making time to stop and think and walking through some things helps you get that same response, because more often than not, we can control the outcomes. We just don't always know it. And if we can just pause for a few seconds and be thoughtful, can be very helpful. Years ago, CEO of the organization I worked with, as I tell the story, this isn't exactly fact, but you would have a conversation with him, and I swear the guy would just stare at you for like 10 minutes. You're like, are you going to respond? It really wasn't that long, but it was a long enough pause so that he could actually think through to then react. So he knew how he was going to drive with his response, how he was going to drive the outcome that he wanted. And at first I just wondered, like, was there something wrong with him, or why does he do that, or does he? And then as I matured in leadership, I'm like, that's outstanding. He's really being thoughtful to drive the outcomes in every conversation he has.
I think that's probably a good place to leave it, I would assume.
Yeah. Any other questions for us?